Antimage and Isekai LitRPG Adventure Ends of Magic Book 1, audiobook by Kevin Chapter 13 Touring the City That Was Foolish, Phelan said after they had departed the square and were walking down a deserted street. You spoke of an uncle in the academy. What if they asked after the uncle? How would you have responded? Nathan pursed his lips. I probably would have used the name of one of the mages I killed in the battle. Maybe one of the war mages. He thought a bit more and winced. You're right, that was a mistake. She nodded and started lecturing him in a fast and intent voice. Lying well is a matter of giving few openings. If you give your foes a detail, they may pull on it and force more from you. You never know what may reveal you. A master of deceit will seem to give much information, but it will dissipate like mist when grasped. Instead of speaking of an uncle in the academy, speak of a victory in the wilderness, or a favor owed by a high-placed figure who cannot be reached. Kala Dho Drex would be 1. Low-tier disguise 7 achieved. Dang, low-tier skills level up fast in hostile territory when you have a master mentoring you. Wouldn't they know she's dead? Nathan asked. Phelan rolled her eyes and snorted. She's pretended her death before. Some have claimed to own her demise only to be slain in turn. She is known as tricky by reputation and deed. It will take some time for people to believe that she is truly dead. She paused for a moment, eyeing Nathan suspiciously. Verified truth, she is dead, he chuckled, remembering the confusing combat that had ended with the feeling of ribs crunching underneath his knees. She's dead. She had some kind of healing artifact that tried to save her from the mortal wound, but I ate it and got the notification from Davrar. It's what pushed me over level 81 in my assassin class. He was struck by a sudden thought. How did she convince people she was dead before? Did she fake a notification from Davrar? Mind magic, Phelan said patiently. Mages are not allowed to use mind magic against each other, and it is reason for an immediate duel. But the Nails have bare respect for those mandates. She looked around calmly, surveying the street while seeming to take in the densely packed slave housing. The Nails patrol the streets at night during a lockdown. Be aware of them and any eavesdropping or censor magic, and kill any you see. Nathan had been keeping an eye out for any spells that came near them, but there hadn't been much. Now he looked around, alert for any hazy patches, either on ground level or in the sky. There was nothing. I'm not going to get caught by that trick again. They rounded a corner and emerged into a larger thoroughfare, where litters were being carried back and forth by well-muscled slaves. Phelan gripped Nathan's arm again, seeming to be entranced by one litter that seemed to gush gleaming lace. It was a convincing act, and he was drawn into it. As they kept walking, Nathan tried to track the layout of the city. The Ascendant Academy was a landmark in the center, and large roads branched out from it like spokes on a wheel, each terminating in one of the major gates. Other roads circled the city at various intervals, with squares at the intersections between the two. It wasn't perfect, and there were definitely areas where the simple design was broken up by large estates that forced the road to divert. The design was easy to grasp. The problem was that Nathan didn't know the names for everything. There weren't any street signs or maps, and he had no clue where to find the silver square. But Phelan did. She guided him through the city, pointing out various landmarks as they went. She didn't even try to hide the actions, simply acting like a native showing off her hometown to a partner who didn't know it well. I'd be a bit screwed without her. She has the skills and experience to infiltrate Giant's Rest and the knowledge necessary to make plans. Without Phelan, I'd be a big dumb oaf trying to punch down a mountain. She's guiding me to the best place to dig a mine so we can plant a bomb and bring the whole thing down. Phelan stepped close and hissed instructions to Nathan under her breath as they approached their destination. We are not here to free slaves. After Housemate, all know that the Mage Breaker can free slaves with a touch. They must think that mages of Giant's Rest are the hands behind this attack. She shot him a warning look. We may spare them, but do not let a slave see obvious anti-magic or else they must die." Nathan frowned, looking at the paving stones underneath him. They were laced with a delicate tracery of bright silvery metal that reflected the light from the magic overhead. He drew Feline closer and whispered in her ear, aware of the presence of people around him. "I agree about freeing slaves, as we can't keep them safe afterwards. But is it worth a life to keep my presence secret?" Feline studied him but didn't seem annoyed. She carefully considered his question and leaned against him to whisper her response. "Yes. Many slaves will die if Giant's Rest is to fall, and the secret of our presence is worth a dragon's hoard. With the lockdown, they will believe this attack came from within. We must be invisible until suspicion has added its weight to greed and mage fights mage. People might die, but that's not permission to kill for convenience," Nathan responded stubbornly, drawing Feline into a corner of the square, away from the other people. Feline sighed airily, though there were traces of aggravation in her voice. "Hear me, this argument is a prophecy of death. We can attempt to subdue any inconvenient witnesses, but I will not stay my daggers when they are needed." Then she giggled, jarring Nathan out of the argument. The sound was both adorable and disconcerting because of who it came from, and the assassin grabbed his hand and pranced towards a small compound that took up half of one side of the square. Over the closed gate hung a large crimson dart, and inside stood at least 3 separate buildings barely visible through the abundant foliage. They approached the gate and Feline made a show of knocking while not actually striking the wood. She spoke out of the side of her mouth. "Break the enchantment, but don't throw the gate open." Nathan probed the magic on the gate, finding it to be robust and functional. The gate would resist tampering, stop a battering ram, and sound an alarm in either case. He resisted the urge to just absorb the entire enchantment. Instead, he took a few seconds to understand how the whole thing worked. There was a bar that would slide aside when the gate was fed the proper authentication. Probably better to make it look like this got hacked by a skilled mage, instead of somebody with the ability to absorb magic completely. He couldn't spoof the authentication part of the spell, and that meant the alarm would activate if the gate was opened. So Nathan destabilized the targeting portion of the message, alarm, with a tiny application of anti-magic, and drained the mana reservoir that would sound an audible alarm. Then he used the attractive properties of his aura to manipulate the portion of the enchantment that actuated to unlock the gate, but not the part that would cause it to swing wide. Mid-tier aura manipulation 5 achieved. The whole process took him about 10 seconds, including understanding the enchantment and disabling it in a minimal and non-obvious way. He gave the gate a small push and it opened slightly, allowing both of them to slip inside before pushing it back closed. Nathan prodded the enchantment again, locking the barrier behind them as the bar slid back into place. Inside was a sculpted garden, decorated with trees, colorful flower beds, and a small pond. The path meandered around to the left and towards the first building, which looked inviting and hospitable. There was a shirtless and well-muscled slave tending the garden, but he had his back turned to them as he pruned a bush. Feline jerked her head and led the way off the path, moving towards the third building. It was hidden from view by the garden, and they dove into the brush to approach. The assassin was almost completely silent, stealing through the trees like a breath of wind. Nathan activated Airwalk, stepping a few inches above the ground to avoid snapping any sticks and hopping over a bush without rustling any branches. It cost a bit of stamina, about the same amount he'd gotten from messing with the gate. They emerged from the garden to find a large home or small manor, complete with a beautiful patio set against the pond that lay in the center of the compound. The area looked purpose-built to host parties, with groupings of comfortable weatherproof chairs and low tables to hold food and drinks. Various small animals in the pond and trees chirped to provide a pleasant background noise. There was a guard at the front door, standing stiffly against the wall. Nathan reached out and tapped Feline on the arm, motioning to the side of the house and pointing to a second-floor balcony. She nodded, and they moved out of the guard's line of sight, skirting around the edge of the garden. Before they turned the corner, Nathan studied the building that was farthest from the gate. It was tucked away in the back and was the least aesthetically pleasing of the structures, with a large storage area and what looked like a forge attached to the side. His companion saw him looking. She pointed to the first building and whispered an explanation: stable, sales, and demonstrations. Then she pointed to the one in the back: workshop. Her finger moved to the balcony above their heads. Home, up, up. Nathan scooped Feline up once more. She'd left her dimensional pouch on her hip, not removing anything Nathan needed to be worried about. He bounded into the air, setting her down on the balcony after just a few steps, before landing himself and moving to the door. It had an alarmed magical lock, but the construction wasn't fancy. Nathan bypassed it in seconds and they stepped into the bedroom beyond. The centerpiece was a perfectly made bed big enough to sleep 8. An open door led to a tiled bathroom, while another opened into a huge closet. Magical auras abounded, from the plush carpet under their feet to the hairbrush on the vanity. Nathan had to pull his aura in tight to avoid disabling things, but he still paused to take a measure of the space. This looks a lot like a luxury bedroom on Earth. Luxury is the same across worlds. Though they've probably got one of the zero-gravity baths here, and enchantments can do better than even the most expensive materials on Earth. This carpet feels like walking on warm clouds. He heard a soft sigh from the third door, which stood open a tiny crack. He crept over, keeping his ears perked and taking in the field of view available through the gap. He saw a woman's head draped back against a sumptuous couch, her eyes closed, and a sated expression on her face. A male voice spoke from out of view, deep and melodic. "Those twins have proven their worth. Should we keep them?" The woman let her mouth fall open and exhaled slowly, sounding entirely spent. After a moment she mustered up the energy to reply, eyes still closed. "No, they're worth adamant. We should dangle them before the founder, try to earn favor from the highest tower." Feline had drawn a long dagger and jabbed it towards the woman demonstratively. She pointed at Nathan and then farther into the room, towards where the other voice had come from. Nathan nodded, holding up 3 fingers. He put one down, then the next. After the last finger dropped, he pushed the door open smoothly and quickly, striding into the room as Feline whispered through behind him. There were only 2 people in the room, both naked. The woman lay back on the couch while the man sat on an ottoman in front of her, massaging her outstretched feet. The man noticed their entry and his face twisted in confusion. What in the giants? He didn't get any farther. Nathan took 2 long strides and punched him in the neck, crushing cartilage and bone and throwing him to the carpet. The woman's eyes were still closed, and she didn't react at all as Feline came around the back of the couch and planted a dagger into her eye. Nathan cast his gaze over both of their victims. The woman spasmed slightly, but the dagger in her brain would kill her in seconds absent a very powerful heal. The man would take a little bit longer to expire but wouldn't do anything except choke on blood until then. Nathan listened for any other breathing, indications of any witnesses. He heard nothing, so he turned to Feline. "How do we make this look like other mages?" She extracted her knife and wiped it on a handkerchief from her bag. "We light the house aflame. I've got some potions of fire." She started stripping their targets of jewelry, going after enchanted rings, amulets and earrings, dropping the loot in her bags. "That will kill any slaves who live here, won't it?" The assassin rolled her eyes. "They will flee the flames if their masters do not command otherwise." "Yeah, I think that's getting too far into hypotheticals. Going to extremes to ensure we don't cause any collateral damage would endanger us beyond reason. This has been a shockingly clean attack so far." If we attempt to do something silly like clear the building or carry the bodies elsewhere, it'll almost certainly backfire. Do it, Nathan said. Feline popped up with a smile, grinning at him with unadulterated joy. Her teeth had sharpened again, and the feral grin was creepy in the unremarkable face. This has been an easy target. Let us depart before our fire is smothered. On the floor, the man rattled his last breath, his frantic eyes finally sliding closed. Magekiller has leveled to 125. You have slain artisan mage Lang Dho stedsed in perfect stealth inside a secured area. Feline dug out a glass orb full of red liquid that exuded fire mana. She ushered Nathan back into the bedroom before tossing the orb at the two corpses and closing the door. There came the muffled sound of shattering glass, followed by the f-woom of a rapidly growing fire. Nathan didn't need any more prompting. He pushed the balcony door open and stepped outside, leaving it open behind him. He reached for Feline and she leapt into his arms, tugging up the hood that hung off the back of his robes. Hers was already up, blocking the view of her face. "Take us a few buildings over," she said, resting her hand against his chest. "Away from the square. Look like you're flying, not running." He obliged as best as he was able, leaping upwards and running a few inches above the roof, headed towards the back of the compound. Right before he reached the back wall, he crouched on thin air and jumped explosively, using stamina to assist the motion and give another few subtle kicks to further increase their speed. Airwalking 4 achieved. Feline grunted as Nathan's arms dug into her, but they soared clean over the next street and reached the roof on the other side where Nathan could resume his run without fear of being seen. The roofs were tile and he didn't want to leave any evidence that they weren't using a fly spell, so Nathan kept walking on thin air. He accelerated further, quickly moving a few blocks and being careful to cleanly jump over every gap so it looked like he was soaring without effort. Feline wasn't using her stealth skills, seemingly wanting them to be seen fleeing by air. She giggled against his chest with the speed of their movement, then murmured into his ear, "This is far enough. Down into that alley." At her words, the powerful look-away skills reactivated and they dropped to street level unseen. Feline was still giggling as Nathan dumped her unceremoniously on her feet. She almost collapsed, leaning against a nearby building. What a blasphemously clean departure. "Come, let us gawk at the spectacle." Her face smoothed out in an instant, and she grabbed his hand and dragged him towards the nearby street. They came out of the alley into a street that had a good view of the compound, and joined a sparse crowd of a dozen mages gawking at the sudden blaze that had ripped its way out of the second story of the home. Nathan took his cue from the crowd, dropping the hood of his robe and watching the blaze with a shocked expression. "I saw 2 mages flying away," said a man in the pink robes of an entertainment mage, looking around with a frown on his face and tracking the direction they'd come. His gaze landed on Nathan and Feline, but he dismissed them a moment later. "That mana won't flow clean," Feline exclaimed in a disgusted voice. "By the giant, this isn't a time for mages to turn on each other." There were mutters of assent from the group, and the man shook his head. "A founder returns for a time of ascension, but some want to bury the giant." "Indeed," Feline agreed, before tightening her grip on Nathan's hand and guiding him out of the crowd. "Void of Magic has leveled to 299. You and your companion have killed 2 mages of Giant's Rest and destroyed their home." His companion spared him barely a glance as they departed the scene, instead navigating them carefully through the city. Nathan felt eyes sliding off them with his noticeability as she engaged her stealth skills once more. Once they were walking along a deserted street, she spoke again. "We're going to my safe house. It's close." They were in the inner third of the city, but the neighborhood wasn't especially fancy. There was almost zero traffic, and after seeing a few people peeking out of the windows, Nathan understood why. This was a slave master neighborhood where the slender middle class of Giant's Rest lived. It didn't seem like they had permission to leave their homes during the lockdown. Phelan took a sudden turn, approaching an unremarkable door and pulling a magical token from her bag before holding it to the lock. The door clicked open, and she gestured him up a long staircase. It led to an apartment that took up the top floor of a narrow building with 3 rooms in total. The space was drafty and felt a bit desolate, like it had stood empty for a long time. Nonetheless, the space was clean and comfortably furnished. It was a good place for them to rest and plan their next move. "Welcome," Phelan said, coming up to stand beside him. She was back in her taller, elegant shape, having dropped the more homely artisan mage persona. "This is my safety among the terrors of Giant's Rest. None living know of it. Do not reveal it to any. No freed slaves, nobody. Do not return here if you are being followed." She paused to let that sink in. "Now let us plan." Nathan noted his partially depleted stamina, then the golden sky outside. The sun had darkened a little while ago, but the glowing haze emanating from the Ascendant Academy put out plenty of light, blocking off any view of the world overhead. "Dinner first?" he asked. "I thought that might be the light in your eyes," his host said, moving into the kitchen. Chapter 14. The politics of the forum. Phelan wasn't a great cook. In fact, she was pretty terrible. At least she was able to warm and soften the preserved pemmican, mixing it with a bland grain. He tried to ignore the burnt edges. Nathan didn't consider himself much better, but he'd lived on his own for more than a year before he'd come to Davrar. He could manage eggs or a stir-fry. Unfortunately, the cooking equipment was enchanted. Phelan wanted to keep it that way, so she handled the cooking. Over dinner, Phelan described their next move. "Trust my word, we should stay hidden for tonight. I want a building sense of smoke and blood in the city, not a spree of sudden attacks. I want news of the killings to spread, leading all to wonder what may come next." "What does come next?" Nathan asked, awkwardly trying to scratch his back through the heavy mage robe she'd given him. "Are we going to find somebody else from this hedonist faction and kill them so they start getting paranoid?" Phelan's answering smile was a picture of menace. "No, we will find a gathering, a party if one occurs, a meeting if one does not. There is always a party in Giant's Rest, and tomorrow morning I will hunt one down, then we will strike. Can I come? I want to train up some skills, and sneaking around the city has been good for skill ranks so far." Phelan rolled her shoulders in a languid shrug. "As your flame calls. You are a good companion to have, making barriers of adamant evaporate like mist." The assassin stood, casually tossing her plate into the sink. "Clean up, and we can become comfortable." She spoke with a suggestive lilt and sauntered over towards the bedroom. Nathan grumbled, getting to his feet and thinking about what was about to happen. Phelan had been trying to seduce him ever since they'd entered the city. He wasn't sure if she was about to proposition him or if she was waiting for him to make the first move. The intent was clear either way. I'm of half a mind to go along with it. She's impressive, powerful, and hot. And who's never had a fantasy of a lover who can change shape and even sex? Exciting in all sorts of ways. But I'm also not sure I trust her, and that's a bigger deal. He frowned as he scrubbed at the plates under the cold water of the tap. There was plumbing in the apartment, but it was limited to cold water in the kitchen and a running trough in the bathroom. But he was glad that doing the dishes meant he had a chance to think this decision through. While it would certainly be exciting and fun to get into it with Phelan, it would be an additional risk. Being attracted to somebody was one thing, but having sex in the middle of enemy territory with the only person who could guide him through that territory seemed dumb. It's like something out of a Bond movie, where he sleeps with somebody, and you immediately know they're either going to betray him or die. This isn't a spy movie, but there's certainly the risk that sleeping with Phelan goes terribly. Under these conditions, we can't exactly have a one-night fling and go our separate ways if it doesn't work out. Though Davrar wasn't Earth, and it didn't have the same social paradigms. Both he and Phelan were adults, and if they talked about it, Then maybe they could have some great sex without complications. Nathan certainly wanted to on a physical level, but there was still doubt in his mind, reservations that wouldn't quite go away. I think she used social skills to influence me towards killing people back in Housemint. I'm not sure about that, but I did notice that I was only able to really stand up to her after my mental fortress development. The thought triggered another memory, and Nathan relived the aftermath of the battle against Giant's Rest. He'd stood over dozens of surrendered mages, with Kia arguing for mercy on one shoulder and Phelan promoting slaughter on the other. I got a rank of mental fortress when I told her no. That reinforces but doesn't confirm my suspicions. Why didn't I notice it at the time? Was there another mental skill, or did I just have too much to think about at the time? Are the dishes clean yet? Phelan asked from the bedroom of the apartment. She stood silhouetted, wearing a dressing gown of sheer fabric, almost a negligee. It was a dark purple but thin enough to show her pale skin through the fabric. She wasn't wearing any underwear. Nathan sighed, looking down at the dishes and realizing that they'd been clean for a little while. He set them to dry and met Phelan's smoking gaze. Decision time. Ultimately, I'm worried that I'm a tool to her, and this might just be a way for her to control me. As long as I'm careful here, I can always say yes later, when we're not literally in the heart of Giant's Rest. When things aren't quite so complicated and I trust her more. He nodded as he came to his decision, making sure to engrave his choice into his memory. He wouldn't change his mind unless he had good reason to. He met Phelan's eyes and gestured towards the couch in the sitting room. I'll sleep there. I can use my bedroll if you don't have spare blankets. Mental Fortress 7 achieved. The beautiful woman looked at him with an unreadable expression before responding with a single syllable. Ah. There was a volume of meaning packed into the word, conveying disappointment at his refusal and assurance that she wasn't upset. The sultry look she shot him over her shoulder as she turned away communicated that the offer was still open. Now let's just see if she keeps pushing. They left the apartment early the next morning with an imperceptible distance between them that hadn't existed before. Phelan wasn't quite so familiar with him, but she still flirted mildly and got into his personal space a few times. She managed to skirt the line masterfully, backing off right before he was about to bring it up every time. Nathan decided to let things lie. They were here to destabilize an empire, and he wanted all of their focus on that task. We should have different disguises today. Those mages might have told somebody that a young couple was looking for the Steads. Maybe two brothers. Nathan suggested. Phelan shook her head dismissively. An attractive appearance makes information gathering an easier target. She pursed her lips. I can be your younger sister, recently graduated from the academy. She pulled out the pink robe of an entertainment mage for herself and gestured for Nathan to reuse the same enslavement mage robe as before. They left the safe house shielded by Phelan's skills until they reached a neighborhood where two mages wouldn't be remarked upon. Then they found a local cafe where 10 mages were engaged in a freewheeling discussion. Unsurprisingly, the gossip centered around various groups as they maneuvered the sudden power vacuum that had resulted from the death of so many powerful and prominent mages during the battle. The current focus seemed to be how the death of the Steads couple fit into the political turmoil that dominated the city. Nathan did more listening than talking, but he did speak up a few times where there was an obvious gap. He kept Phelan's advice in mind, trying not to say anything falsifiable while suggesting twisty motives for the murders on the parts of the Nails and Archmages. Low-tier disguise 8 achieved. The chief gossip-mongers seemed to be the trio of mages who owned the cafe. They held court from a raised plinth, resting on overstuffed couches. The three of them generally agreed that the murder had been caused by the many favors accumulated by the couple, though it was uncertain if the killer had owed a favor and not wanted it called in, or if they'd wanted to prevent the Stedst from providing those favors to an ally. "The mana doesn't flow clean for either path," said one of the three atop the plinth. The thin-faced man shook his head disdainfully. "It is a time of ascension, but some mages see only the truth of the fist, not the waste of a senseless killing." Phelan seemed satisfied that they'd extracted all the gossip they could and led him on, closer to the center of the city. There Nathan caught his first glimpse of the base of the Ascendant Academy, where the colossal towers merged into a monolithic structure. From up close, it was obvious that the academy wasn't built with the same methods as the rest of the city. Many of the buildings of Giant's Rest were decorated, especially here in the heart of the city. But the portion of the academy that fronted the square looked like a cathedral, built huge and with aesthetics as a primary goal. And that aesthetic was magic. Enormous stone carvings reminded Nathan of mana flows for various spells, and perpetual examples of the spells hovered above each of the massive carvings. The architecture itself made it clear that this was a place to learn magic, and you could likely learn small insights by just studying the exterior. But the grand entryway was closed, and several exquisitely carved 15-foot golems stood beside them to guard the way. Phelan directed them towards the end of the square opposite the academy, where there was a kind of forum area. Several dozen mages were gathered to speak and listen, taking turns to cast their voices wide from enchanted podiums. A tall, older man in an orange robe was speaking authoritatively, and everybody listened attentively to his words. "Badad's imminent recovery is a prophecy of doom for the greedy. Heed my warning. If you should reach your hand upwards, you will lose your fingers." Several mages sent evaluating glances towards Nathan and Phelan as they approached, quickly checking them over. They failed whatever the test was, and were summarily ignored as irrelevant. The next speaker was a sharp-faced young woman in the red robes of a war mage. She stood on a second platform and clasped her hands together in a Giant's Rest salute. "This is a time of ascension, when prophecies are resolved and Giant's Rest rises or falls. Those very words mean that it is time to reach upwards. It is time for every mage to rise beyond what they are capable of, that our great empire itself will be born upon the swell of our magic. Many have died, and their duties lay empty." The war mage gave the salute again, this time towards the orange-robed man who had just finished speaking. "Lecturer Tirof Dho Favis, I hold your words with respect, but I would raise my hand to say that those who reach upwards now do it to fulfill the responsibilities of those who have fallen, not to seize their riches. To tell us to shackle our mana now is to deny Giant's Rest the loyal children it needs to seize glory." The crowd seemed receptive to her words, with approving murmurs breaking out across the gathering. Most of those who agreed were younger and stood closer to the woman's side of the forum. She wasn't without supporters. "We risk a splintered spell," the older man retorted. "If you think only of the glory of Giant's Rest, wait until the founder and the archmages decide upon a path. Then once the path is set, follow their words." His tone was a bit dismissive, and it clearly rankled the woman. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes for a second, gathering her composure. Then she opened them and spoke in a sharp but measured tone. "If we are to aid Giant's Rest, we must contribute to the decisions that are made. Many who led are dead, and you will not find new leaders by acting as the nails. Bring those who wish to strain their insight into the discussion. We will develop ourselves into what Giant's Rest needs and act according to the decisions we contribute to making." The subtext of what the woman was saying was clear. She was ambitious and was offering her allegiance and that of her followers in return for a place at the table. There was also a threat in her words, that they would not listen to the older leaders of Giant's Rest if they didn't feel like they had a voice. This reminds me of what I remember about ancient Athenian democracy. The man studied her for a second before coming to a decision. Well argued. Nure Dha Nornusk, you may attend the gathering this afternoon at the Chaka's estate. Come in 3 hours and expect to stay late. Your voice will be heard. His mouth twitched in a smile. Come hungry, for Nal Dho Chakas has the best kitchen outside of the academy. The woman smiled victoriously. She bowed her head to Tiroff and repeated the salute. A handful of blessings upon you. I will come to raise my hand that we may lift Giant's Rest ever higher. Tiroff stepped down from the platform and started reaching out to people and shaking hands. 2 hazy patches in the air moved with him. They'd been out of sight for Nathan, but he recognized the distinctive look of an invisibility spell. Probably Tiroff's bodyguards. They might have skills to see through stealth. We already got the information we needed. Time to skedaddle. Nathan elbowed Feline gently and took a step backwards, trying not to stare at the disguised people flanking the orange-robed man. He felt their gazes pan over him and spent a minimal amount of focus to divert their attention while they beat a hasty retreat. Phaline's stealth skills were also active, and he felt sure they'd avoided notice. High-tier noticeability 4 achieved. They strolled away without a care in the world, joining a few other mages who had decided the show was over. After a few minutes, Nathan shot another look around, making sure to scan the sky and the nearby rooftops. We're clear. They didn't follow us. It sounds like the Chaka's estate would make a good target. Do you know where that is? Feline wore an eager expression. It is a fortress of an estate owned by one of the richest enslavement mages in Giant's Rest. I have been trying to kill him for a decade. Now he has received a prophecy of death and we shall deliver it. Sounds like it couldn't happen to a nicer person, Nathan said sarcastically. Then he shook his head in mild bewilderment. That was great timing. I was expecting it to be pretty difficult to get the information we needed. Bard skills, Feline said simply. You have benefited from dramatic entrance, but I also have helpful gossip. She gestured down the street, a grin revealing sharpened teeth. Let us find lunch and prepare our approach to the Chaka's estate. There are disguises that will make our attack blasphemously confusing to our foes. Nathan and Feline scouted out the Chaka's estate and established their entry point, then waited until the party was well and truly underway before making their move. The property covered a huge tract of land in the intersection of Giant's Rest, the size of the estate as much a declaration of wealth as the fabulous manor house barely visible from the front gate. They didn't enter from that direction, judging the number of guards too high. With that much security, it was very likely that a few of the slave elites would have perception skills. Instead, Nathan picked up Feline again, and they popped over a set of tenements at the back of the property. There were magical protections in place to prevent entry, but they didn't extend high into the sky, and Nathan found it simple enough to carry Feline over the barrier. The area within was the industrial heart of the Chaka's business empire, with well-organized workshops, forges and warehouses sharing space with dormitories and cafeterias. Slaves toiled even as the evening wore on, smelting metal to produce armor and weapons, as well as other sundries from nails to wheel rims. Feline directed him to drop down in a blind spot behind a warehouse, and they faded from notice with the combined weight of several stealth skills. Feline was disguised as a man a bit older than Nathan, skin rough from hard living. Both of them were dressed in coarse, undyed clothes, much the same as the slaves around them. As they walked around the corner, Nathan spotted something promising set against the wall of a warehouse and looked around to see if anybody was watching. Then he hustled over to the object, grabbing it and passing the other end to Feline. She seemed unconvinced, but shrugged and accepted. She grew a few inches to match his height and hoisted the top of the ladder onto her shoulder before leading them deeper into the manufacturing complex. 2 people with a ladder on their shoulders can go anywhere. Low-tier disguise 9 achieved. They navigated their way through the slave quarters like that, passing through several magical sensors that checked for tokens that would authorize them to pass into various areas. Nathan bypassed each one in turn, reaching out with his aura to hotwire the spell to approve everybody, not just those who bore the correct token. The aura manipulation skill is amazing. It's like messing with machinery with a proper toolbox, where before I only had a sledgehammer. Granted, you can do a lot with a sledgehammer, but not if the goal is subtlety. It took almost a half-hour of walking to pass out of the industrial area of the Chakas estate, but they eventually reached the edge of the rich parkland surrounding the mansion. Trees poked over the wall that wrapped around the garden, and slave elites stood to the sides of the gate. Their eyes glazed over as Nathan and Feline walked up and regarded the closed gate, Feline's stealth skills ensuring the two guards saw nothing out of the ordinary. The assassin shot a worried look back at Nathan, but he was concentrating. The lock on this gate was elaborate. It was designed to be hard to hack, and there were multiple layers of redundant alarms to detect when the gate was opened improperly, as well as 5 different levels of authentication. It might have been easier to just go over the wall. There's plenty of eyes around here, but we have a lot of stealth skills. He kept at it, not letting the pressure get to him. Eventually, he figured out the trick, tracing the spellwork and realizing that 3 of the authentication spells were decoys, and that only 2 of them needed to be triggered to open the gate. Wizard Senses 4 achieved. The slave elites were starting to regard them with suspicion, their own skills latching onto the pair that had been standing in front of the gate for 30 seconds. But then the gate swung open and the guards relaxed, letting Nathan and Feline pass into the wooded estate beyond without a word. There was another pair of guards on this side, but they didn't react as the 2 assassins strode down the gravel path with their ladder held casually on their shoulders. After they were out of sight, Feline jerked her head towards the side, and they ducked into the shade provided by the canopy of an ancient tree. There was a nook here with a bench and a small pond vivid with aquatic flowers. It was a secluded, beautiful spot. They dumped the ladder against the bench and quickly changed clothes, Nathan handing over his rough-spun fabrics for another mage robe. "Do you have a skill for having the right disguise?" he asked, peering at her dimensional bag suspiciously. "I can tell that's a pretty big pouch, but it's not large enough for how many different disguises you've pulled out over time." Feline smiled mysteriously, lips plumping out and becoming more sensual as her form became feminine and curvaceous once more. "Shape your eyes to the task ahead." Her new disguise was more busty than her normal figure, with dark ringlets framing a heart-shaped face that looked pulled from a glamour magazine. He shook his head in mild exasperation as they left the nook, sticking to the shadows and approaching the sprawling manor. It was a huge structure, covered with magical decorations and windows lit from within. Sounds of merriment spilled out from various openings. Nathan studied the building for a moment, then pointed at a second-floor balcony that looked fairly secluded. A particularly large tree overhung the balcony. They could get there while staying out of major sightlines. Feline nodded, and she leapt into his arms with a practiced hop and a quiet chuckle. This new body was heavier than her normal form, and he took a second to steady her before stepping into the air. Nathan approached carefully, sticking to the building and staying away from windows. There were multiple layers of wards and traps on the structure, and trying to breach one of the windows would result in several nasty spells to the face. He popped over the edge of the balcony and dropped Feline to her feet. Nathan's attention caught on a decorative snake twining around the railing. It hadn't been part of the ward spells, so he'd ignored it. Now Nathan caught the faintest twitch of movement. Alertness 5 achieved. He spiked his anti-magic into the statue as the golem core in its chest roared from an ember to a blazing fire. The construct coiled to strike, but the real danger was the message spells fired off in various directions. Nathan caught them all in his aura and shredded the communication magic into scraps of undirected mana. Feline leapt back, clearing distance as two daggers flashed into her hands. Nathan grabbed hold of the stone serpent and held it in place as he tore the mana out of it. It writhed and tried to strike with fangs that wept poison, but his concentrated aura stole the motive power from its magical muscles even as the core was drained dry. Drops of poison sizzled on his wrists, eating small holes through the robes but failing to damage his perfected body. The whole event was over in an instant, and Nathan set the drained golem onto the floor gently. He let out a tense breath. "It's all good. It didn't get an alarm out." The assassin sighed with relief, her blades flashing back into the sleeves of her black robes as she grabbed the snake golem and began feeding it into her dimensional pouch. "Good. Now the door," Nathan nodded, wiping his forehead with the robe that marked him as a nail. Then he set to work disabling the door alarms. Chapter 15, Descent into Hedonism. Nathan took his time with the door, laboring over the fiendishly complicated enchantment with single-minded focus. It didn't hold the elegance or power of many of the more ancient enchantments he'd interacted with, but it made up for it in sheer paranoia, with layers of reinforcing and authenticating enchantments. He erred on the side of caution in disabling the lock, and was forced to dissolve a chunk of the enchantment with his aura. It was possible that somebody would figure out that it had been disabled by anti-magic instead of bypassed with normal mana, but it was the only way to be sure he wasn't going to set off an alarm. After double and triple checking that the security enchantment was properly disabled and the bar had been magically raised, he cautiously pulled the door open. Wizard's Intuition 4 achieved. Mid-tier Aura Manipulation 6 achieved. Geez, that thing was like a Swiss watch. Some poor guy probably spent 3 months putting it together, but it was probably a Giant's Rest artisan mage, so I feel more concern for the slave carpenter that built the door. Feline was keeping watch, though she shot worried looks his way. Anxiety was clear on her sculpted face, but it transformed to murderous glee when the door swung open noiselessly. She stepped forward and seemed about to kiss Nathan, but he pulled back and gestured her through the portal. She murmured softly as she passed, tapping a small maker's mark set into the lock. "That was an adamant-traded ward. With your talent, the only target we cannot strike is the academy itself." They prowled through the door, finding an empty hallway stretching into the building. Doors led to the left and right, but they were all closed. Laughter and the clanking of cutlery echoed from deeper inside, and Nathan followed Feline as she ghosted down the corridor. He wasn't the target of her stealth skills, knew she was there, and had perception and mental protection skills. She still became a black-robed blur that was hard to focus on. The hallway opened out into a fancy sitting room well-provisioned with couches. Side tables were laden with fancy bottles full of colored drinks ready to pour into crystal glasses. A few trays held ground herbs Nathan didn't recognize, but the tray of pipes made their intended use clear. The room looked like it was prepared for later on, when the guests had finished their business and would retreat to a more intimate setting for relaxed socializing. A maid stood statue-like in front of another door leading out of the room. The black blur of Feline closed in, and the slave gave a faint gasp and crumpled. Nathan winced, crossing the distance to check on the fallen woman. She still breathed evenly, and he looked up at Feline in surprise. He hadn't been expecting her to be merciful. She twirled a stubby rod before it vanished back into her robes. Sleep, enchantment, slow to recharge and must touch bare skin. But the death of a slave may trigger an alarm, and this lays a trail saying that mages were here. Now stand straight. We are guests, invited to show that the nails live beyond their archmage. He nodded. What if there are other nails present? He pulled in his aura, containing it inside a close radius around his body. Some of the mages here would be able to directly sense mana, and he couldn't have his aura spilling out. Phaeline shrugged offhandedly, her voice dropping to a whisper. Then we represent a different faction of nails. Only Kala knew all in their ranks, and none will be surprised that they have splintered at her death. She opened the door, letting in a wave of sound and light. Phaeline strode authoritatively out onto a second-floor landing, where a small group of mages were huddled around a table loaded with a buffet. They were looking out over the balcony at the crowd of mages below, gossiping in anxious whispers. Nathan recognized Nur-A Dha Nornusk, the young war mage who had pushed to be involved in the decision-making process and been invited to the party as a result. The others with her were all similarly young, and it seemed they'd been taking a break from the politicking of the party. To Nathan's eye, they looked overwhelmed by the pressure of the upper echelons of Giants' Rest society. The group turned as the door opened, jumping at Phaline's sudden appearance and shrinking slightly under her knowing smile. Their eyes widened as the black robes of the Giants' Rest secret police registered. That was enough for the younger mages to pull together to present a united front to the duo. Phaline didn't give them time to recover, wary of placing your hand in the blaze. No surprise, given your lack of value here. You lack power, money, and friends. Her attention turned to the crowd below. Friends who matter. You should be down there seeking patrons. They may be able to protect you from what is coming. Phaline snorted slightly, as if amused by a private joke. Then she turned away, making for the staircase with a dismissive wave. Choose wisely. None of the younger mages said anything in response, though one of them whispered a spell. It was barely audible to Nathan's enhanced senses. Tracking Mark, he felt the spell reach towards him, bringing up his hand in a cutting gesture and pretending to cast a spell of his own. Dispel. His anti-magic lashed out and shredded the spell, also cracking through the offender's mage armor like a club through a thin pane of glass. Nathan took an aggressive step towards the clustered mages, a predatory smile on his face as they all shrunk back from the implied threat. Low-tier disguise 10 achieved. Now what? I've done well acting the part of the thug, but if I need to move beyond threats, it'll be pretty obvious I'm not a mage. Mages don't punch people. He was glad to feel Phaline's hand on his shoulder, gentle but restraining. It was accompanied by a low chuckle and a soft admonishment. We all weave the same color for tonight. Leave the young ones to their schemes. Her gaze refocused on them, icy and threatening. But my indulgence is done. Do not attempt to interfere with the nails. With that, he and Phaline turned and left together, leaving a group of thoroughly cowed mages behind and descending the sweeping staircase to join the party below. They joined the party in a bubble of silence, moving through an open space as the guests reacted to their robes and scurried out of their path. People avoided their eyes, seeming not to want to give any invitation to talk. The nails have cultivated a reputation. I see. Seems fitting to take advantage of it. A tall, imposing man in a green robe in the center of the next room turned away from his conversation and frowned deeply at their presence, his stately brows coming down in a thunderous expression. The rest of the party went silent, and the space between them cleared as he inhaled angrily and addressed them. The nails show themselves. Kala Dha Drex is gone, and you look for a new sponsor in my home. I don't know you, but the nails were not given an invitation. He seemed to be working himself up into a fury and looked around the room with fire in his eyes. Who invited you? What fool brought you into my home? His tone promised disfavor, and nobody responded until his gaze landed back on Phaline. She met his gaze evenly, a slight smile across her sumptuous lips as she gave a measured and respectful dip of her head. Honored Mage Nal Dho Chakis. Your party is a place to speak and mingle with the giant's fingers so that the giant's nails may know how best to serve the academy. In this time of ascension, we seek to know the people who should be known. Who invited you? The man ground the words out, his face reddening as he stared at Phelan. She tilted her head as if innocently confused. "Nobody. We came on our own. You have a gorgeous estate." The blood drained from the man's face as quickly as it had come, and he gasped like a beached fish. "You stole into my house, past adamant wards. But the nails can't." Phelan's expression was a work of art, with a warm and friendly smile paired with eyes like sharpened icicles. The bearer of that expression would not start a fight, but she would finish one. "We are here to speak and listen if we are welcome. If we are not." I suppose she is trying to avoid a fight. It would be pretty obvious we weren't nails if we actually came to blows. I can probably survive a fight that starts like this, but I'm not so sure about Phelan. Everybody had taken another few steps back, leaving the center of the room empty. Several mages moved to flank Nal, ready to act on his command. He looked around and seemed to gather confidence from his supporters, sneering in response. "Bah, this is a trick. You disguised yourself as other guests to enter, though you will tell me how you fooled the divination enchantment." He brought his hands up and spoke deliberately to cast a spell. Mage armor, he cast the spell provocatively, baiting for a reaction. Phelan didn't give him one, but the tension in the room ticked upwards. The mages to either side of the enslavement mage mirrored the spell, sheathing themselves in their own protective magic. But Nal wasn't leaping straight to a fight, and he spoke dismissively. "Kala was the hand that guided the nails. Now she is dead, and you pretend more than you have." "But I know of your weakness and hear you," Phelan interrupted his tirade. "Did you think Kala the only power of the nails?" She tipped her hand towards Nathan. He stepped forward, frantically trying to figure out what to do now that he'd been prompted. The cardinal rule of improv is yes and. You take what your partner gives you, agree, and then add another layer on top of it. So let's do that. Nathan brought his open hand up between them, palm up. He sneered at Nal and spoke in a grating voice. "The nails have insights beyond what you know, old man. Insights from the founders." Then he clenched his fist and slashed out with his aura. Nal's mage armor shattered, along with that of every other mage who stood with him. Risky, but confirmation bias means they'll see what they expect to see, which is a nail using wordless magic they don't understand to pop a bunch of mage armor spells with a gesture. Congratulations, you have developed the low-tier disguise, utility skill into mid-tier disguise. Utility skill, mid-tier disguise. This skill will make your disguises more convincing in the future, especially in conversation. The mages confronting them hadn't been struck in any physical way, but they all staggered back at the loss of their protective magic, some of them tripping over furniture and falling over. Gasps sounded from the room around them, and all of the other guests tried to both get out of the line of fire while trying to see what was about to happen. Nathan brought his aura back, tight above his skin, ready for action. Either they'd fight now, or they'd be watching him carefully. He was poised on the balls of his feet, ready to leap forward but unwilling to strike and ruin the masquerade unless necessary. Nal Dho Chakis stood upright and glared murderously at Nathan. His anger had turned cold, and the enslavement mage's eyes were calculating as they flitted from him to Phelan, judging the level of threat. He focused on Nathan first, and a spindly thread of mana reached out for him. But it didn't approach normally, instead moving through the dimension where mana pools existed. He's got some kind of skill, enchantment, or silent spell that can check somebody's mana pool. Mage Infiltration says it will give me a fake mana pool, but I haven't practiced with it. He quickly shaped his anti-magic into the approximate shape of a mana pool, which he knew well from breaking dozens of them earlier. He made it big, nearly the same size as Stella's, and then raised a mocking eyebrow as the searching tendril reached him. Nal Dho Chakis sucked in a surprised breath, and the tendril snapped back. He looked shaken once more and swallowed heavily. The enslavement mage took a second to regain his focus, struggling to think of what to say. After a moment, he just nodded curtly, addressing Phelan. You may listen to our words. I will give a speech soon, and you will hear the truth of Giant's Rest, though it will not please you. Then you will leave. Mid-tier disguise 2 achieved. He turned on his heel and left, passing through an innocuous curtained opening underneath the stairs. His supporters all looked at each other awkwardly and stepped back, trying to escape the public eye and fade back into the crowd. Nathan looked to Feline, feeling the attention from all around the room. He shrugged. That was abrupt. Was it wise? Her smile was satisfied, wide without a hint of teeth. Indeed, we have won our admittance. Now it's time to meld with the walls and listen. She gestured, and they walked over to the side of the room, near the doorway Nal had passed through. From here Nathan could see into the next room, which looked like a presentation space. Tables groaned with food along the edges of the room, and dozens of chairs faced a stage with a podium on it. The conversation in the room was slow to start up again, but hushed whispers turned into open conversation over a minute or two. The room filled as people reclaimed their spots and resumed discussion, though they avoided the false nails like there was a magical barrier around the two. Nathan eavesdropped a bit, hearing some of the conversation going on. Unsurprisingly, some of it centered on them, though nobody seemed willing to openly confront them after his display. Other topics abounded too, similar to what he'd overheard in the cafes and streets of Giant's Rest. People were worried about the future, with the loss of the battle and the brazen murder of a pair of generally liked mages in their home. The difference was that these people seemed to have access to better information and more capabilities to fix the problems. Some groups discussed training new slave elites to replace those who'd been lost in the battle, with a focus on perception skills to prevent future ambushes. Others speculated on the faction that had killed Lang and Thara Dho Stedst, but with privileged information. They all knew more about the different factions and their conflicts than the average mage on the street. One of them had seen the report from the investigation and spoke about expertly bypassed enchantments, shooting a sideways glance towards where Nathan and Feline stood. The implication was clear enough. After a few more minutes without any drama, Nathan felt Feline carefully ramping up her stealth skills. He used his own skill to push attention away, following as she carefully slipped through the curtain after Nal. There was a subtle spell on the curtain that reached out to check if they were allowed. Nathan hadn't noticed it among all the other magic, and hastily blanketed the alarm in his aura, disenchanting the curtain entirely before it could respond to Feline's unauthorized entry. Whoops. Hope that doesn't get discovered. Nobody seemed to notice their exit, and the narrow hallway on the other side of the door was empty for the moment. There were a few other openings into other rooms, and a slave turned the corner at the far end bearing a platter of food. The attractive man was intensely focused on not dropping the platter, and didn't spare them a glance as he passed through another curtain and back into the party. Feline strode down the passage, seeming to know exactly where she was going. As they walked, there was an announcement that the guests should gather for Nal's speech. Feline paused and leaned over to say a few quiet words into Nathan's ear. Kill Nal quickly and quietly. Don't let him cast a spell, and don't stain his robes. You handle any mages, I'll take care of any others. Nathan nodded hesitantly, starting to understand the shape of Feline's plan. They climbed a short staircase and pushed open a door to a small prep room, where Nal stood in front of a tall mirror while an elderly slave busied herself adjusting his artfully graying hair. The enslavement mage saw them in the mirror, and his eyes widened in alarm. He spun as Nathan accelerated, and had time to yell for help. Instead, his hands rose to cast a spell. Disintegrate. The spellcasting itself was relatively quiet, and achieved precisely nothing. Nathan had already wrapped the man in his aura, and the mana drained away before it could even cohere into the spell. Then Nathan's left hand covered Nal's mouth as his right chopped at the back of the man's neck. Bone crunched, and a muffled wheeze escaped as the imposing man flopped limply in Nathan's arms. An automatic healing enchantment tried to activate from an amulet around the enslavement mage's neck, but Nathan killed the magic immediately and slowly lowered his victim to the floor, where his eyes rolled and mouth opened and closed with a quiet wheeze. Nathan turned to Feline, grimacing as he saw her cleaning bloody blades on the dead slave's clothing. "He'll be dead in a couple of minutes." She nodded, then gestured towards the dying man. "Help me get his robes off." They spent an awkward 30 seconds pulling the man's sumptuous and multi-layered robes off. Then Feline yanked off her black robe, standing naked over the prone form of the enslavement mage and staring down at him. Her figure morphed as she adopted the face and body of Nal Dho Chakis. Her new voice was deep and commanding, a perfect match for the enslavement mage who just confronted them. "Pile the bodies together, atop the bloodstain." She pulled on the set of green robes, which fit perfectly. She pointed towards the original's hands, where a half-dozen enchanted rings sat on his fingers. "Which of these are safe?" Nathan scanned them all with his magical senses, discarding any where there was any chance of danger. He pointed. "That one is the mage mark. These 3 are also fine, and the amulet, though it's discharged." The disguised assassin reached down and pulled off the indicated jewelry, quickly donning them before turning towards the other exit to the room. She glanced over to Nathan. "Stay away from sight. I will speak, then fake my death. Reveal yourself on stage in the black robe, grab me, and come back to this room. I will firebomb the corpses, then we will flee. We'll go out the first entrance on the left, which is close to a window facing the rear of the building, then into the air and away as quickly as possible." On the floor, the mage gurgled and died. Mage Killer has leveled to 139. "Congratulations. You have slain the prominent enslavement mage Nal Dho Chakis inside his own home, without any alarm being raised." Feline wasn't distracted, and she waited until Nathan had given a nod in return before stepping forward and opening the side door to reveal the stage and podium they'd seen earlier. The anticipatory murmurs of the crowd indicated a full house. Nathan watched as Feline strode confidently out onto the stage, perfectly matching the now-dead man's gait. He was just catching up to what had happened. "Holy shit, we really did it. We snuck into the house of one of the richest men in Giant's Rest and assassinated him. Now Feline is impersonating him, speaking to all of the most influential people in town with his authority. What a tour de force." The disguised assassin gathered the attention of the crowd with a few deft gestures, and Nathan considered just how they'd pulled this off. "All of my abilities came into effect. Anti-magic, especially being able to bypass magical security. Flight, stealth, and disguise. But Feline, she needed me to bypass the magic and get her in, but all of this is based on her knowledge, stealth, and social skills. I know she has a skill called dramatic entrance from her bard class, and I can't help but wonder if that helped us pull this off, or if she has other skills like it. She's an incredible force multiplier for me, like I am for her. I'm starting to believe we really can take down this city, so long as we can keep pulling shit like this. But now that she has this platform, this disguise, how is she going to use it?" Thank you for listening to the story on KevinAudio.com Chapter 16. A message from the founder. Feline stood behind the podium disguised as Nal Dho Chakis, the influential enslavement mage and host of the current gathering. Her posture was commanding, reminding Nathan of politicians speaking to the camera. The honored founders established Giant's Rest after the ending of Elements. Her voice was similarly resolute and carried clearly over the last murmurs of the crowd. They raised their hands and conquered the Dungeon of the Giants, then shaped it to shelter the weary survivors of the ending of Elements. They established the Ascendant Academy from those ruins and trained the first mages. Feline's gaze was distant as she talked, like she was seeing something from the pages of history. We were new to the light of magic, but they taught us its secrets. Seize power with your own fists, they said. Conquer the continent and civilize it. Gain wealth and insights that the Academy will stand past the ending of history and all endings that follow. That is the task they set for us. Her voice grew mournful but didn't diminish in volume. But then they left. They promised to return when needed, and they did. Each time Giant's Rest was threatened, a founder has led us to victory, taught us new magic, and departed once more. That will be true so long as we hold their command to our breasts to continue expanding Giant's Rest. Feline lowered her gaze from the past to focus on the audience. We have fulfilled their command. Giant's Rest spreads across the land, and our power flows clean. Where once we were bare hundreds, now 10,000 mages command hundreds of thousands of slaves. We conquer dungeons and grasp new lands, with riches and insights flowing back to the Academy. The disguised assassin gestured, growing more animated and speaking faster as she approached the crux of the argument. We learn new magics, create new power from the resources of Davrar. The disintegration spell, automatic healing enchantments, the slave elites and their enchanted equipment. All of these are our own development, new sources of power. My own slaves work the forges that make weapons and armors for our soldiers, and I supply 1/6 of the enchanting materials in Giant's Rest. She stopped, letting the room fall into expectant silence. Her retelling of the origin story and the destiny of Giant's Rest had left the crowd dangling on her words. When she spoke again, it was slow and ominous. But our enemies have grown as well. The elemental tribes in the north have swelled in number, and their hordes challenge us every solstice. The Sklian necrarchy in the south sends soul eaters and undead armies to attack our cities, while every year more dungeons awake. The threats have developed, and for the good of the Academy we must exert our new strength to win regardless. Another moment of silence stretched before Phelan's voice rose once again. Then there is Gemor. Several indrawn breaths from the audience indicated that this was a sensitive topic, but she pushed on. Gemor, the city of slaves and barbarians, a strayed child in need of a firm hand. Her expression grew ugly, or so we thought. But then they conquered Halsmit and killed 100 mages. It was a prophecy of woe, the greatest setback Giant's Rest has suffered. But then a founder arrived. Badud called forth from history to conquer our challenges. We offered to be his hands, as would any loyal graduate of the Academy. The founders have ever led us to victory and power. She let the audience hang yet again. But then Badud lost. 4 archmages are dead, along with hundreds of our most powerful mages. They raised their hands at the command of a founder and were cast down by slaves and barbarians. Badud lies defeated with a cursed wound, though he still swears to deliver us inexorable victory. Her voice was harsh, and many in the crowd flinched back from the caustic tone. Feline pressed her point, speaking emphatically and stabbing her finger toward the crowd. There is a lesson here for every student of the Academy. Founders do not have a prophecy of victory. The survivors of the battle speak of the Mage Breaker, a man whom spells cannot touch. He is a new threat to Giant's Rest, one we must confront ourselves without asking the honored founders to cast aside all obstacles, as a child asks their father. Her eyes burned suddenly, lit with an internal fire. For how else will a child grow? We are the leaders of Giant's Rest. The founders are a part of the Academy, but we must grow from the children they knew and seize our destiny for ourselves. We must find our own path for. Feline paused mid-word, a sudden shiver running through her entire body. Her mouth worked and she coughed deeply, clutching at her chest. Then she collapsed to the ground, eyes moving to meet Nathan's behind the cover of the podium. One of them flashed pink. That's my cue. Nathan, still dressed in the robe of a nail, dashed a few steps forward and seized Phaline's body. It was heavier than any of the times he'd lifted her recently, but he activated his rage to make the task easy. He hefted her limp shape and sprinted back into the dressing room just as the first shouts of alarm rose. As soon as they were out of sight, Feline squirmed and reached for her pouch. She pulled out a potion of fire and hucked it at the two corpses as Nathan pivoted to change direction, leaving the dressing room for the back hallways of the mansion. The bodies roared up in a sudden inferno that overtook the small room behind them, and without Nathan's aura, it would have flash-burned both of them. More yelling spread behind them, accompanied by the sounds of people casting spells and giving chase. But Nathan was already accelerating, leaping down the stairs in 2 airwalk-assisted steps. A slave carrying a stack of dirty plates was slammed aside, bouncing off the wall as the plates shattered on the ground. Nathan took the first left, bracing his feet on thin air to help him make the sudden sideways leap. He identified the biggest window in the next room and thrust his aura forward like a battering ram, disabling all of the wards and spells that made the thin glass as tough as a stone wall. Then his body impacted the window, spinning to break the glass with his back while curling around Feline to protect her from the collision. He went right through the window, bursting into the night and completing his spin to take off once more. The shattered glass had torn his robe and scratched his back, but the wounds healed immediately as Nathan took off, focusing entirely on getting gone. Acceleration 3 achieved. He zipped over a flower garden, making for the trees and staying close to the ground. He was trying to get into the tree line and out of sight of the mansion as quickly as possible. If somebody took to the air and started chasing them, it would be hard to achieve a clean getaway. The foliage ahead was dense, and it would be easy to break the line of sight in there. Both his and Feline's stealth skills kicked in, making them hard to spot in the relative darkness. The barest flash of fire mana made Nathan juke sideways, and a bar of fire narrowly missed him. It carved a line through the greenery ahead, a half-dozen fires flaring up along the path of the spell. Effortless dodge 2 achieved. Then Nathan was amongst the trees. He stayed beneath the canopy as he zigzagged through them, kicking from side to side. Feline shifted in his arms, reverting to her normal size and shape. The reduced weight made Nathan's job easier as more spells landed around them. The magic accomplished nothing except demolishing several trees and lighting up the night with confusing shadows. The spells stopped as calmer heads prevailed, and a detection spell pinged across the entire area. Nathan absorbed the portions of the spell that got close to them, and he knew that the mages behind him were frowning at the failure of their spell. Unfortunately, he didn't know the fastest way out and was generally just moving away from the spells. But for all he knew, he could be headed straight towards a barracks of slave elites. A powerful enchantment thrummed to life ahead, and a blue glow shone through the trees. The magic spread up into the sky, a shimmering veil of force that rose up in all directions to encapsulate the estate in a shielded dome. Nathan chuckled and shot straight for the closest part of the shield. He broke out of the cover of trees and ran towards the base of the shield, which was the inner wall of the estate. Instead of rushing straight through the barrier, he slowed to examine it first, wanting to ensure it wasn't a disintegrate wall that would vaporize Feline. It wasn't. It wasn't even a particularly strong shield. It appeared to be built to repair itself extraordinarily quickly, so much so that it would be difficult to blast a hole in the barrier and pass through before the hole closed. But a circle of his aura did the job just fine, and Nathan accelerated again as he passed over the wall and into the industrial section of the estate. This wasn't the same area that they'd entered. It seemed dedicated to finer work, with many rows of small workshops. Lights shone from within to indicate that Chaka's slaves were still hard at work as the night wore on. Nathan didn't stick around to see more, instead running just above the rooftops and towards the distant edge of the property where they would blend in with the general population. He glanced back. The shielded dome was still up, and a flash of magical light shone from inside. From the vestiges of the spell, Nathan guessed it was supposed to dispel invisibility spells, which wouldn't do them any good. The important thing was that nobody seemed to be following them in the air. With all of the buildings and walls Nathan was flying over, somebody on the ground would need Brox's speed to keep up. The only remaining obstacle was the magical protections on the outer wall. Nathan flew over it once more, relying on their combined stealth skills to fool any watchers for the seconds they were silhouetted by the light from the academy. Then he peeked over the edge of the next building, into the street. Curfew was in effect, and it was deserted for 100 feet in both directions. Nathan dropped to the street and deposited Feline gently on the cobblestones. "You've become a good passenger. Void of Magic has leveled to 309. You and your companion have raided a Giant's Rest compound, killing an important mage and escaping retaliation." She chuckled, eyes wide and cheeks flushed. "What an escape! My bones say they're still searching the gardens for us. Much simpler than my last assassination." She quickly pulled the pink robe from before out of her bag and started changing, stuffing Chaka's green robe away in efficient motions. Nathan swapped out his own black robe for the green of an enforcement mage. A moment later they were disguised once more as brother and sister touring the city. "Let's celebrate," Feline said once they had reached a main thoroughfare and put some distance between them and the mounting uproar from the Chaka's estate. She gestured towards a quiet restaurant on the side of the road, with 4 tables set around a fountain. They sat down and a pretty young woman approached with eyes downcast. She listed a few food and drink options and then took their orders back to the kitchen, leaving Nathan and Feline alone with the gentle tinkling of water and a few privacy enchantments set into the fountain. Nathan exhaled slowly, relaxing for the first time in hours, though it felt like it had been much longer. Feline gave him a knowing smile, satisfaction radiating off her like a physical force. She looked like a cat who had gotten the cream. That seemed appropriate. After all, they just committed a masterful piece of political sabotage. Damn, we really did it. Only minutes later the slave returned with a second helper, placing a bottle and glasses before them along with a few cheesy appetizers. Feline poured the pale yellow liquid before flicking her glass to produce a resonant chime. "Health to the giant." It sounded like a ritual phrase, if a little sarcastic. Nathan copied the motion and words, receiving a nod of approval. They drank. The light wine paired wonderfully with the cheeses before them, and Nathan gave a groan of appreciation. Giant's Rest might have been an evil slaving empire, but they sure had their luxuries. For the ruling class at least, which composes a small percent of the population. "This is similar in quality to the best restaurants I've eaten in on Earth, but that's because the slaves here become slave soldiers if things aren't excellent." Once the main course was served, Nathan started the conversation. "Your words were excellent. I can't imagine a better way to spread chaos than casting doubt on Badud and the other founders, and then faking your own assassination. Now everybody will think Badud was scared of what you said." The assassin smirked back at him, looking every inch the smug 20-year-old she was pretending to be. "My aim is true, isn't it?" She sighed fondly, eyes going distant as she considered the day's accomplishments. "Now we watch for the response. We might need to do more, but so far we've had Algoa's luck in our mission." "No kidding. Everything turned out better than I would have expected," Nathan replied, thinking back over what they'd done today. Feline had gathered the information and handled the social and most of the stealth aspects, while Nathan had taken care of the magic and combat. "We work well together, my capabilities complementing yours." The assassin idly twirled her glass and looked around to be sure that nobody was near enough to overhear. "Hear me, that's true. I have long lacked a solution to wards, as well as a method for a quick escape. If we continue to strike from stealth, we can drive the mages to kill each other and intervene if any seem to gain the advantage. We will bring Giant's Rest to its knees, and they will not threaten Gemor or Housemit for a generation. Nathan frowned slightly. He didn't want to weaken Giant's Rest enough that it wouldn't threaten others for a generation. He wanted to outright destroy them for what they represented, for what they'd almost done to him and had done to so many others. He wanted to free every slave who wore a collar of mental magic, but that was impossible and the reason why towered into the sky like a pillar of heaven. He studied the building with a set jaw before turning back to Phelan. "Tell me about the academy. Who are the students? How do they graduate?" "Later," Phelan said, eyeing a few mages walking down the street. They were making a show of examining everybody they passed. "Some earlier acquaintances are on patrol." The two of them reverted to silence, digging into the meal with gusto until they were interrupted somewhat rudely by the trio of mages. "Have you seen anybody fleeing this way, or anything strange?" Phelan looked up at the man who'd asked, the picture of surprised innocence on her face. "What occurs? We haven't seen anything. Was it a slave escape?" The second of the trio, the only one who wasn't an enforcement mage, circled to get a good look at Nathan's face, and he forced himself to return the woman's gaze calmly. He didn't think many people had gotten a great look at him at the party since he'd kept his hood up the entire time. He also had Forgettable, a class skill to ensure people forgot details about him. There was no flash of recognition on her face, and she answered Phelan's question with a shake of her head. "No." "An assassination at the Chaka's mansion." The woman's face twisted in hatred. "The nails, I swear doom on those fools." "By the giant," Phelan's reply was high-pitched. "The nails, should we leave? Will there be fighting?" Nathan caught one of the enforcement mages rolling their eyes. "If your hands are idle, you should leave. The nails are gone, but—" He bit his lip and darted an eye at the other two mages. "There's a splintered spell looming over all of Giant's Rest." Phelan gasped, then motioned for the waitress to come over. She pulled out a purse and dumped currency into the slave's hand before standing and gesturing for Nathan. "We will get to our home. Blessings of Algoa upon you." Nathan rose more slowly, escorting Phelan away. The mages let them go with hardly a second look, continuing down the street in the opposite direction. He walked in the general direction of the safe house, and she didn't correct him. When he'd turned the corner, he gave her a gimlet eye. "Did you pay with Chaka's money?" She snorted and looked up with a sheepish grin. "The meal was worth a dragon's hoard. I wasn't going to pay for it." Nathan just sighed, finding himself tense once more as they traversed the nighttime streets. The glow from the academy and the magic around it served to light the way adequately, but it only illuminated more patrols of mages on the streets. Some were led by enforcement mages, moving systematically in their search. Others seemed to be groups of mages roaming the streets, looking for an outlet for their anger. When these groups met, there was usually yelling but no spell casting. Nathan glanced over at Phelan. "Should we take advantage, pick off a few groups, leave the bodies to be discovered?" She hesitated, considering the idea. "Too risky and too likely to reveal us as non-mages. I don't have enough potions of fire to burn many more victims. We will stoke this flame tomorrow with another deliberate strike." The sound of a detonating fireball sounded from the direction of the Chaka's estate, and the assassin smiled. "Though I don't know if this fire needs to be stoked anymore." They kept their disguises but started sneaking through the night, trying to avoid the attention of any of the scattered groups. It wasn't hard with their skills. Soon they had truly cleared and gotten away from the roving mages. The city still felt like it was holding its breath. Nobody moved in the streets, but people watched out of their windows. Their eyes skated right over Nathan and Phelan, but he still felt like an ant under a microscope. Neither of them thought anybody was following, but they still ducked into a park and did a loop to shake a tail before diverting to the safe house. The tension still hadn't left Nathan's gut after they'd ascended the staircase, and he didn't move towards bed. He sat on one of the two chairs in the kitchen, closing his eyes and using battle meditation to calm himself as Phelan spread out the loot she'd taken from the enslavement mage. It's not unreasonable to be tense. We just pissed off a lot of people, and it's not outside of the realm of possibility for somebody with a high-level tracking skill to find us, or for somebody to scry Phelan. Though if it was that easy, she would have died a long time ago. He was a lot calmer when she sat down in the chair opposite him a few minutes later, and he opened his eyes to see her back in her accustomed shape, elegant face and dark hair streaked with color cascading down her back. She was back to wearing the thin garment from last night, its diaphanous material clinging to her body. Extinguish your doubts. We are winning. Would you like to celebrate? She slowly dragged a finger from her stomach up between her breasts to her neck, leaving no doubt what she was suggesting. Nathan sighed and put his elbows on the table. Again, very tempting. A bit of distraction sounds nice after all the tension of today, but I decided not to mess around yesterday, and I'm sticking with that decision. I didn't give her an explicit no yesterday, I need to do it now. He looked up again, meeting Phelan's expectant and glowing eyes. No, I don't. He paused, considering his next words. Phelan, while we're in Giant's Rest, I want to keep my focus on the mission. Then he gave a small smile and made his voice slightly teasing. Afterwards, she sighed, leaning forward and planting her own elbows on the table. Stalker shit. After today, I need a release. He shrugged, resisting the urge to explain. Sorry, Phelan looked up glumly. Hear me, I understand how you've blazed your own path. Would you rather talk about the Ascendant Academy? Nathan nodded in return. Yes, please. I can hear the teenage me screaming in the back of my head. Picking a lecture on a school system over having sex with a beautiful, powerful woman practically throwing herself at me. But I can't shake the feeling that sleeping with Phelan would backfire epically. Chapter 17, Demanding Reprisal. Phelan waved one hand at Nathan tiredly. You have questions about the academy? Ask. What separates the different tiers of students? Nathan asked curiously. You told me that there are 3 different levels. Yes. They are named for the tiers of skills and talents. A student will start in low tier and wear a gray robe. They must pass a test to develop to mid-tier. She scrunched her nose, remembering the details. The test starts with basic mana shaping, and then spells that every mage of Giant's Rest should know. Mage armor, moderate curing, paralysis, 1 elemental attacking spell like Fireball, Ice Spike, or Earth Orb. The student then demonstrates other spells they have mastered and must impress a group of lecturers. Favors are traded. Phelan yawned slightly, leaning back languidly and running her hands through her hair to pull it back. The motion exposed her bare neck and shoulder, and Nathan jerked his eyes away. You made your decision, now stick to it. Out of the corner of his eye, Nathan saw a small smile on Phelan's face. Her tone grew amused. Once they are mid-tier, students may choose their lectures and follow many different paths. Many choose the path of artisan mages or enslavement mages, and graduate once they've completed their coursework and passed a specialized test. Artisan mages learn enchantment and crafting skills, while enslavement mages learn spells like Mass Daze and Dominate. She yawned again, standing and moving around the kitchen, her clothing doing little to cover her shapely backside. Would you like some hot wine? I'm cold. Yeah, because you're not wearing much. Nathan shook his head, refusing the offer before continuing the line of conversation. Do they need to become high-tier students before graduating? Phelan activated a heating enchantment with a wave of her hand, then retrieved a glass bottle from a storage cabinet. She answered without looking back. No, that's a wait few accept. A mid-tier student must have a sponsor to advance to high-tier. That means an archmage, a lecturer, or a mage with political power. She poured the wine into a pot and mixed it with a packet of spices. High-tier students are effectively apprentices, and they follow the path to higher magic. All archmages were once high-tier students, as well as most war mages. Nathan chewed that over for a moment. Tell me more about the lecturers. Orange robes, Phelan snorted. proud of their status though they know only magic and arrogance. I killed one some time ago. He didn't understand what was happening, though he could cast spells like an archmage. Some archmages wear orange robes as well, but most wear whatever they desire. All know the archmages no matter their dress. Why'd you kill a lecturer? Nathan asked, perplexed. The assassin shrugged, tasting some of the wine off her spoon. It is rare to see them outside of the academy, so it was worth being bold. Information of the academy, fewer to teach new Giant's Rest mages. She glanced back with a sly smile. I acted as an attractive young slave master dazzled by his status, and he told me much of this information about the academy over pillows before his lifeblood stained them. Then she sighed, her shoulders drooping slightly. But he didn't tell me about the security of the academy. The assassins disguised as new students never returned. Nathan blew out a breath, reminded that he wasn't the first of Phelan's apprentices, just the most recent. She tried to recruit adventurers during the solstice graduation, and from what Nathan remembered of her speech, her apprentices didn't tend to survive their first trip into Giant's Rest. She's still alive. Does she send them on suicide missions, or is she just that much higher level? She does have 2 classes suited for social manipulation and stealth, and practices caution above all else. His musing was interrupted when Phelan sat down across from him, lips pursed to blow on a steaming mug. It smelled like savory cooking spices mixed into a sweet red wine. She eyed him through the rising steam. You want to know the workings of the academy so that you can attack Badud. He didn't bother denying it. And the rest of the academy. We can only do so much out here. To break Giant's Rest, I need to break that, Nathan said, pointing towards the window and the gleaming magical edifice beyond. She tilted her head, considering him carefully. The move put her eyes in shadow and revealed their inner glow. You have stared the ghoul in the eye, so I will answer your questions. But know that you wish to attack a quester in his own dungeon. You will die attempting such a deed, and our opportunity to hurt Giant's Rest will die with you. She waved a hand downwards, indicating the city. Giant's Rest is a dungeon, but it is my dungeon. Together we can hit every target, set the factions against each other, and break their power for 50 years. But hear my words, the only way to strike inside the academy is to have the mages carry problems there. I don't know their protections, but they are suited for a dragon's horde. Nathan looked down. Maybe you're right. We work well together and we should keep working to weaken them. It will set back Badud's plans anyways and give Housemate time to become stable. What we're doing is also helping me gain assassin levels, plus ranks in my stealth and disguise skills. But that won't be the end. He felt for the familiar ember inside him, the one that had been present ever since he'd first understood Tial and everything Giant's Rest stood for. He'd promised himself he'd bring down the slave empire. That promise hadn't grown weaker with time. It had become a pillar of his identity, a primary reason he walked his path. Once we're done, I'm going in. I will tear down the Ascendant Academy or die trying. Nathan paused, watching as Phelan delicately sipped her mulled wine. Her eyes never left his face and her expression was intent, as if he was a puzzle for her to solve. Eventually she replied, voice quiet, "As your flame calls, but remember you weigh more as a threat than a sacrifice." Nathan sighed. "We have some more time to decide. Can you tell me everything else that might be important for sneaking into the academy?" She sighed but acquiesced, telling him everything she knew about the interior of the academy, from the fact that low-tier students stayed in suites attended by a slave to the usual schedule where students usually had a long class in the morning and another in the afternoon. After finishing her wine, she yawned widely again, leaning back and running her hands through her hair. It shortened under her fingers, seeming to shrink back into her scalp. "My target is sleep." She cocked one eyebrow at him in a subtle invitation. Nathan crossed his arms. "I'll stay up a little longer. We stirred up a lot of chaos tonight, and I don't want to be caught off guard in the night if the building gets fireballed in the chaos." Feline lifted a shoulder in a delicate shrug. "Then I will wake early to discover the outcome of our efforts." "On your own?" Nathan asked, surprised. The assassin's eyes narrowed and she looked at him incredulously. "As I've been doing since before you were born." She shook her head and walked into the bedroom, closing the door with a touch too much force. "At least she didn't make another pass at me." Nathan woke up when Feline left and gave her a little wave before she stepped outside. The assassin was disguised as a grizzled old artisan mage and gave him a grumpy nod. The night had been boring. He'd stayed up into the early morning, but hadn't heard any indication that the unrest they'd started was spreading. He rolled over on the couch and went back to sleep. He woke up some time later, sure he hadn't slept longer than a few additional hours. There was no obvious activity outside, so Nathan got up and grabbed some breakfast. "I wonder how long I should wait for Feline to show up. Should I stay here all day or go looking for her? Where would I look? I don't really know my way around the city." There wasn't long to contemplate the question, because the door banged open as Nathan dug into his meal of fried sausages and toasted grain cakes. Feline strode in with a stony expression, back in her leather-clad assassin shape. "Follow me, we have a problem to kill." Her voice was clipped and she was already turning to leave. Nathan looked down at his breakfast. Then he checked his stamina. It still wasn't full after the previous day's escapade. "Can it wait 5 minutes for me to eat?" The assassin turned back to him and rolled her eyes. "Pardon my axe. Eat quickly." He proceeded to inhale the food in front of him underneath her impatient glare. Eating fast enough, he would have gotten heartburn if that was something that could still happen. Feline watched in silence, then jerked her head as soon as he was done, opening the door and vanishing down the stairs. Nathan shook his head and followed, leaving the dirty dishes on the table. He caught up to her on the street, looking around and seeing nothing out of the ordinary. The street was completely empty. "Couldn't wait to explain inside." "The flame we set has been smothered," she replied, speaking in a frigid voice as she walked. Badad sent messages in the night, gathering all the factions to his hand. She hadn't bothered disguising herself, and while both of their stealth skills were active, it was still surprising to see Feline striding the streets of Giant's Rest in her leather armor, and with the same face she publicly showed in Gemor. Something's upset her, or there's another reason she's being so cavalier. He called every mage of weight to a gathering so they could hear his words and speak of the tensions. She hissed the last word, putting derisive emphasis on the description of their efforts over the last few days. "Are we going to attack that meeting?" Nathan asked thoughtfully. "Can I fight Badad and the gathered archmages together? Maybe, if it's a small room and I can cover it with my aura." Feline shook her head sharply. "He has brought them all inside the academy. None other could allow so many in, but a founder has that power." She sighed, but it was a sound of focused anger. "We cannot strike there. They will speak to each other and discover that none among them launched these attacks. We must act now and counter Badad's effort at peace." "How do we do that?" She shot him a sidelong look as they exited the neighborhood, heading in a new direction. "We will strike in a way they cannot ignore. A deed that burns to the bone and demands an immediate response to disrupt the meeting and flare tempers hot." Nathan frowned at Feline, but she turned her gaze forward and was reaching into her pouch. She tossed a gray robe at him. "Here, wear this." The uncertain expression remained on his face as he obeyed, pulling the soft robe over the light clothing he'd slept in. "This is a low-tier student's robe. Where are we going?" "The compound of Archmage Jurger Dho Cav. An older archmage, expert in force and earth magic. He owns some mines, but much of his wealth comes from charging for the use of his insights in construction. Either him or his heirs have created almost all of the roads of Giant's Rest and many of the buildings." She continued with a slight snort. "He is also famous for having many heirs. I wish we could kill him and set loose that Hydra nest, but he's at Badud's gathering, along with his most powerful family. There will be elites at his home, but few mages of great power. We will enter and destroy his wealth. Nathan nodded. Okay, let's do it. What is our disguise? Phaeline whipped out her green robe. I am enslavement mage Vodal Dha Bids from Scargus. I bring an unknown child of Archmage Cav so that she indicated Nathan, may be raised with power and wealth and enter the academy as is his due. Wait, we're claiming I'm his son. That seems far-fetched. Nathan gestured to his 6'5" frame. The assassin shrugged, stepping into her robe. She hadn't disrobed as she usually did before changing into a disguise, and the edges of her armor could be seen underneath it. It will get us inside to wait until the Archmage returns. We won't wait. Her hair shifted to a curly blonde, and her skin lightened to a creamy tone. Okay, Nathan said distractedly, looking around to see if anybody had noticed them changing disguises in the middle of the street. The street seemed extra dead, but there were a few people around. None seemed to be paying them any attention, and his noticeability skill wasn't pinging. Phaeline walked quickly, barely below a jog, and they rapidly crossed the city. Soon enough they were striding directly towards yet another mansion, this one taller and bulkier than most. It didn't have an exterior wall and fronted directly onto the street. The entire building almost appeared carved out of a solid block of stone, with even coloration across the surface. There were almost no windows, though the surface was fancifully carved with abstract patterns. They strode up to the door and Phaeline knocked loudly, waiting a second before knocking again. A moment later the door opened, and a somewhat older man stood proudly in the doorway. Yes. Why do you visit the home of the Cav? He said, looking them up and down with quick flicks of his eyes. Allow us in, that I may speak to the Archmage, Phaeline said, holding her own head high. The corner of the man's mouth quirked, but Phaeline continued with a sneer. Or would a slave deny the Archmage a meeting that makes his family greater? The man blinked. His frown developed farther, but he took Nathan in before nodding shallowly and opening the door wide. He turned and led the way deeper into the building, and Nathan saw the subtle slave collar that rested atop his collarbone. The first thing Nathan noticed about the building was the thickness of the walls. They walked through a corridor nearly 20 feet long before reaching the true entryway, and from what Nathan could tell, that was the thickness of the mansion's outer wall. There was also a magical sensor that reached out towards them. It resonated with their guide's collar and then moved onto Phaeline. It had the same kind of enchantment as the detection spell back in Housemate. It was looking for a mage mark. Nathan almost blocked it before he realized that Phaeline had slipped on the ring they'd gotten from Nal Dho Chakis last night. The spell played over the ring for a moment, and a subtle gem set behind them flashed green. A pair of slave elites in the room had been watching for the confirmation of Phaeline's status, and they gestured politely for her to pass. She dragged Nathan along with her, seemingly not willing to let him stray from her side. The enchantment reached for him but ran into his aura, and the gem stayed dark. Neither of the slave elites seemed to mind, which made sense. He was currently dressed as a low-tier student, and mage marks were only issued upon graduation from the academy. The first slave led them to a richly decorated sitting room not far inside, then gestured towards a side table with a few accoutrements for making tea. The young heir will show his hand shortly. Then the man left, closing the door behind him. Phaeline waited a few minutes before she snorted, leaning back in her chair and shaking out her curls. He better hurry his ending's damned butt, or his father will splinter his spells. Her voice was pitched to carry, as if for an invisible microphone. Sure enough, once Nathan reached out and looked, he found a series of carefully hidden enchantments woven into the room that would transmit anything said deeper into the building. Phaeline shot him a fond look. After all, it is not often one finds a lost child of an archmage, and one with such a talent. She cocked her eyebrow at him, inviting him to speak for their hidden audience. Nathan took a second to craft a response, throwing in some Giant's Rest slang to make it stick. Do we weave the same color as them? Just because this is the home of my father is no reason. Mid-tier disguise 3 achieved. Phelan gave an encouraging nod but cut him off. Your father is this place. They will take you, especially with your special insights. If you work hard, you will inherit your father's power ahead of all others. The assassin said that last part with a sly smile before sitting back to wait. They didn't have to wait long. The door burst open and a young man wearing a purple robe stormed in. His clothing wasn't fully fastened, but his face was red with anger. He rounded on Nathan. You depart now or my magic will break you. Phelan gave a low laugh. You invite a prophecy of death, boy. What is your blasphemy to send away your own brother? The new arrival turned to Phelan and stepped right up to her, shouting in her face. You have no weight here. Leave now before I bury your bones beneath the earth. Phelan snorted in his face, utterly refusing to be cowed. You have dozens of siblings. Will one more change your status? Trust my word, your standing could not be worse. Now bring us to your father that he may judge your brother's worth. Her eyes flicked up and down dismissively. And your own. The boy's face purpled even further, and he stepped back, bringing up his hands into a spellcasting position. Stone Nathan was on his feet in a flash, extending his aura to crack mage armor and interfere with the spell. Phelan was already standing right next to the mage and clasped one hand around his mouth while the other stabbed rapidly into his chest with an enchanted dagger. A dozen blows later, she lowered the body to the ground, carefully avoiding the spreading stain of blood. She spoke into the air. Do not cast spells on other mages. Outside this room, that would earn you a duel you cannot afford. Magekiller has leveled up to 142. You have participated in killing Rodril Dho Cav inside the Cav compound. She continued speaking, lecturing the now-dead Rodril for the benefit of any listeners, and throwing in the occasional retort in the dead man's voice. In the meantime, Phelan examined his figure before shifting shape once more and pulling a purple robe from her bag and changing into it. She wasn't a perfect duplicate of the young man, but backed by Phelan's stealth and look-away skills, it would probably suffice so long as they weren't under direct scrutiny. Next, Phelan reached down for the rings on the young man's fingers, shooting Nathan a questioning look. She imitated Rodril's voice again, giving it a high-pitched squeak. As you say. I will bring you to a place better suited to wait for my father to return. Nathan swept his magical senses through the indicated rings and found that, while they were all magical, only one was significantly so. It was some kind of identification enchantment that checked for the wearer's mana signature. Like a mage mark, but with a unique design that probably meant it was only issued to members of the family. He disabled the part of the enchantment that checked the wearer's magical signature, then gestured towards it. Phelan nodded, plucking the ring from the finger and sliding it onto her own. She jerked her head and they both left the room by the same entrance Rodril had entered from. Nathan followed a few steps behind, watching as Phelan strode authoritatively through the building. The slave from the entrance stood at the next intersection of hallways, and Phelan nodded to him assertively. Leave her to wait. I will take this one farther in. The man bowed deeply, then turned and walked back towards the entrance. They walked deeper into the mansion. Nathan was pretty sure Phelan didn't know where she was going, but you couldn't tell. She walked confidently through the public areas of the house and unlocked a door with her ring, guiding Nathan past another slave elite guard and into the private living quarters. A couple of unclad slaves made come-hither gestures from a nearby room with an open door, but Phelan waved dismissively and kept going, walking in a large loop to get her bearings. Then they went up a staircase and repeated the path. She was looking for something, but Nathan wasn't sure what. Luckily, there didn't seem to be any mages out and about. There were a few household slaves hurrying around at various tasks, but they mostly scattered from Phelan's path. None dared meet the eyes of the disguised assassin. He seems like a real charmer. On the third floor, there was a large area with an indoor garden illuminated by a skylight. To the side was a series of tables and benches that could seat 36, though nobody was present. Phelan seemed to have found what she was looking for. She led Nathan straight towards a wide double door next to the garden and opened it with her ring. On the far side was a large barrack-style living area, with dozens of kids ranging from 8 to 14 years old sitting around and amusing themselves with toys and small spells. Chapter 18. A splintered fellowship. Nathan just stared for a second, checking to ensure that he wasn't looking at an illusion. But no, the room was as he saw it. A few dozen kids played and yelled beyond the open door. Some of the older ones were casting low-power spells for practice or fun, and he could feel the weak magic from here. They were real. The room was real. There didn't seem to be any hidden treasures. Several of the kids had noticed the door opening and turned towards it expectantly. They were surprised to see Phelan, even though she was still disguised as the young man who'd attacked them downstairs. A few shied away. One of the oldest, probably around 13, stepped forward and spoke deferentially. "Honored Brother Rodril, what occurs? When will Grandma Rosita return?" Phelan ignored them, turning towards Nathan. "This is our target. Archmage Gerger is focused on his legacy." She gestured towards the room and drew her hand into a fist. "If it is destroyed, he will not listen to reason. He will strike Badud himself if the proper evidence is planted. I have prepared a note that will point towards the nails, acting to gain Badud's favor against a perceived foe." It wasn't that Nathan didn't understand what Phelan was getting at. From a completely objective viewpoint, it made sense. Badud's move to reconcile the mages had ripped the heart out of their strategy. They needed to do something drastic to interrupt the meeting and inflame tensions enough that the questor's authority didn't matter. Having an archmage attack him might just do it. But this is beyond the pale. I'm shocked at how badly she's misjudged me. I think she spent the last few days trying to influence me towards something like this. But now her hand is forced and she's doing what she thinks is necessary. He blinked at the assassin, taking another second to follow the chain of thought. She hid what we were going for until we'd already broken in and the kids saw my face. She's pressuring me to go along with this in the heat of the moment. Indignant anger flared in Nathan's chest, and he took a moment to commit it to memory, storing an ever-burning flame inside his mental fortress. He would not kill these kids or let them be killed. No matter what arguments Phelan mustered, this was not something Nathan would budge on. If some skill did change his mind, he would remember this moment, this adamant promise to himself. He turned towards his companion slowly, letting some trace of his bewilderment and anger seep onto his face. "Phelan, no, they're children," she countered immediately, clearly expecting his argument. "They are the children of an archmage of Giant's Rest. They will attend the Ascendant Academy and become mages of Giant's Rest, the same as the dozens you have already killed." The older kids seemed to have caught on that something bad was unfolding. They'd backed away from the door, shepherding the other children while trying to stay quiet. One had run to pull on a door at the far end of the room, but it didn't open. He started knocking on it insistently. Nathan faced Phelan down, his gaze growing thunderous as he glared at the ancient assassin in the body of a hot-headed young man. "We can't kill them for what they might become. They're part of a shitty system, but I won't kill them before they've chosen to be part of it." Phelan snorted, disgust curling her lip. "They will become enslavement mages and war mages. They will try to enslave the people of Halsmet and Gemor, raising the cities with their magics. By killing them, you kill that threat now instead of waiting for it to develop." He knew she was right. They were children of an archmage, and the oldest were already wearing gray robes that mirrored Nathan's own. They would go to the academy, and they would become good little mages of Giant's Rest. They probably already treated the slaves here like objects, tools to be used for their own satisfaction. Just like Harthai, who was raised in Giant's Rest. But Katja convinced me to spare her, and she's adapted to Gemor just fine. If I do this, Kia would hunt me down if she ever found out. I'm not sure she'd be wrong to do so. Nathan glared back at Phelan. The mages I killed made a choice. They marched to enslave, to conquer. He remembered a colorful quilt on a bed and winced at the memory of a time when that hadn't been true. Attacking adult mages who chose their path is one thing, but he waved towards the room, have not made that choice. If Giant's Rest falls, they will not be locked into that path. Mental Fortress 8 achieved. A low growl sounded in the assassin's throat, and she took a small step towards the room, a wicked dagger appearing in one hand. They have heard and seen enough to smother our flame. This is the only path that can topple Giant's Rest. A little girl inside the room shrieked at the sight of the knife, but one of the older boys clamped a hand over her mouth. A few of them eyed the space around Nathan and Phelan, as if considering making a dash. Nathan stepped forward, getting closer to Phelan and blocking the door while he considered his next words. He wanted to be in range of her, and he didn't want any of the kids to come within stabbing distance if they tried to escape. Phelan used his hesitation to keep talking. The fall of Giant's Rest will kill thousands, tens of thousands. Many of them will be children, but it is still a flame worth following. This, she pointed her knife at the cluster of watching kids, is no different. It is the only path that sees Giant's Rest fall. She watched his face, seeing the conflict there. Giant's Rest enslaves and conquers. You swore to end them. This is a dark deed, but it is required to achieve your goal. Nathan muttered words under his breath, though they were still loud enough for Phelan to hear. I will spill lakes of blood to avoid spilling oceans. A lopsided smile appeared on the assassin's face, bearing the edges of sharpened teeth. Yes, this is a sacrifice, but it is a worthy sacrifice. We do this so that the people of Halsmit will live free of masters. Nathan closed his eyes and sighed deeply. He'd caught the mental skill this time. It was a subtle thing, carrying him along in the wake of her argument. It encouraged him to rethink his viewpoint and follow her narrative to the point of believing it. It probably started as a bard skill to help tell stories, but now it lets her convince people if she's got even a shred of an actual argument. There was another skill too, one that prevented Nathan from noticing he was being influenced. It had probably prevented him from realizing any times thus far she'd used her skills to guide his actions, but this time he'd noticed. When Nathan opened his eyes again, the assassin hadn't moved an inch. His voice was hard and grating. This isn't an argument. We can empty his vault, trash his enchantments, but we will not kill the Archmage's kids. That is final. Mental Fortress 9 achieved. Phelan hissed and turned away from him, taking one step towards the room. You can stand there as damp ashes or leave and meet me back at the safe house. This deed must be done. Nathan caught her arm. Nope, you're not doing this. She whirled on him, eyes flashing in fury. The face she was wearing morphed, mouth spreading unnaturally wide to reveal a serrated snarl out of a horror movie as she wrenched at the arm he was holding. Her body writhed underneath his grasp, and all of a sudden she gave off the impression of a slavering beast eager to rend flesh. The surprising flash of teeth so close to Nathan's face almost made him let go, and Phelan knew exactly how to pull to get out of a wrist grab. But Nathan's hand wrapped entirely around her wrist, and his strength was far greater. Her intimidation served only to wake his rage, and Nathan used his grip to toss Phelan across the cafeteria. She collided with one of the tables and fell to the ground as the furniture overturned with a clatter. Nathan took a moment to slam the door to the nursery closed, ensuring the locking mechanism re-engaged. Then he turned to his erstwhile ally and strode towards her in a haze of fury. Feline staggered to her feet, probing at her side with a hiss of indrawn breath. She dropped her knife, but with a flick of the wrist it was replaced by another. Nathan stopped a half-dozen paces away, resisting the urge to punch Feline. With the amount of rage flowing through him, it would be a deadly strike. Instead, he reached out with his aura and broke the enchantment on the ring she'd taken from Rodral Dho Cav. Then he met her glare with one of his own. "Get out of here. If you want to figure out another way to do this, I'll meet you back at the safe house tonight and we'll set some rules." The leader of the Gemor assassins had dropped her horrific appearance, and she spat to the side before addressing him venomously. "You're an idiot beyond prophecy's hold. If you're going to fart ice instead of fight Giant's Rest, I'll leave you to flare and die. If you make it back to Housemate and beg, we may revisit this scheme. But I expect you to die fighting hundreds of elites in the next day or two. I will not be caught in the sweep that follows." She backed away from him, angling to break the line of sight as quickly as possible. Her last words were bitter. "Your students will carry on your legacy." Nathan let her go, shaking his head and gritting his teeth. He was tempted to chase after her and try to get in the last word, to threaten her to stay away from Housemate's anti-mages. But he'd only make the situation worse. If he ever wanted to work with Feline again or even stand in the same room as her, he needed to back off. "Sometimes I hate battlefield meditation. I want the excuse of not being in control. She tried to manipulate me into murdering children. Crushing her skull in a fit of rage would be justified." His blood still felt like it was boiling as Nathan turned away and looked around the large room for a fast exit. They'd never intended this to be a long infiltration, and he didn't have the cover of Pheline's stealth and disguise skills on the way out. The skylight overhead caught his attention. Nathan wanted out of this place, and to be far away from what had nearly happened. He didn't want to cross paths with Feline again until he'd had some time to think, some time to process the events of the last few minutes. So he stepped straight up into the air and aimed for the sunlight streaming down into the garden. The sun didn't move across the sky on Davrar, so the skylight was closer to a tall chimney than a normal skylight. It was blocked off by a trio of specially built force enchantments that would be better than glass for almost all purposes, except for preventing an anti-mage from passing through. Nathan broke through the panes of force easily, letting them snap closed behind him as the enchantments reformed the barriers. The roof of the compound was rough, like a barren mountaintop. The thick stone itself was woven with enchantments tinged with wizardry, mostly focused on reinforcement. He wouldn't be surprised if this building could survive the Ascendant Academy falling on it. There was no sign of a disturbance that he could detect, but he didn't want to stick around long enough for that to change. He needed to find somewhere quiet to think. Nathan took to the air, making for a cluster of 5-story buildings close by. They looked like fancy apartments. They were in the direction of the Ascendant Academy, but their roof was complex and had multiple peaks that promised abundant cover. He pushed noticeability as hard as he could, diverting the few eyes looking in his direction as he ran across open air toward the rooftop. He reached his target unseen and easily disabled a couple of basic security spells before settling into a protected nook. He needed a minute to get his bearings, to think through his options and figure out what the hell he was going to do now. So far, everything he'd achieved in Giant's Rest had been by following Pheline's lead. He'd learned a lot from her, but he wasn't confident that he could continue on his own. Sure, he could probably handle breaking into secured compounds and killing mages, but he wouldn't be able to collect information or even travel around Giant's Rest as easily as she did. Additionally, he lacked the detailed background knowledge that let Feline piece together plots and know where to attack to cause the most damage. I'm also still dressed in the robe of a low-tier student, which sticks out like a sore thumb outside of the academy. He could try to head back to the safe house and see if she showed up. Then they could hopefully have a rational discussion about what had happened and continue their campaign against Giant's Rest without quite as much child murdering. That doesn't seem likely for a few reasons. She basically said she was abandoning me and going back to Housemate. The gates are still closed, but that probably won't be true for long. Even if we did talk, do I really think I can convince her to do things my way? Or is it just another chance for her to influence me? The bulk of the academy towered over him, occupying a quarter of the horizon from this distance. He gazed at it, trying to predict what would happen next. Badud was holding some kind of meeting with all of the influential mages of Giant's Rest. They'd almost certainly take actions to curtail any further attacks and would be a lot harder to manipulate into conflict. He had a window to move right now, before the mages finished their meeting and implemented whatever new security they came up with. It might be as simple as citywide scanning magics that he could evade with his anti-magic, or it could be patrols of elites with perception skills, or something else he couldn't predict. If he went back to the safe house to wait for Phelan, he'd be giving up this window of freedom. Even if she does go back there and we can work out our differences, do I think I can trust her again? Will she trust me again? Should I be worried about waking up with knives in my eyes? But what else could he do? Nathan wasn't about to run around murdering random mages in their beds. The longer he stayed out on the streets gathering information, the more likely it was that he'd get spotted, and a message would bring hundreds of slave soldiers down on him. He could outrun most pursuit, but flying mages could follow him until he ran out of stamina, and then elites would pile on to take him out. Giant's Rest wouldn't care if he killed 50 or 100 slaves before going down. They'd send them anyway and count the expense as cheap. Nathan's gaze returned to the Ascendant Academy, with its grand architecture and attendant magical streamers that dominated the city. He'd been disappointed when Phelan had said they couldn't attack the academy itself and should instead focus on tearing down the city around it. The academy was the heart of Giant's Rest, the source of their magic. It was where the Quester and the Archmages resided. If Nathan wanted to truly topple Giant's Rest, that's where he needed to strike. I wanted to use my anti-magic to sneak into the academy after we sowed chaos outside of it. Maybe it's time to go for it. Phelan wouldn't have followed me inside, and she already told me what she knows. If I sneak in now, I'll evade whatever new security they put in place on the city. But how do I get in? He sucked in a breath, standing up and searching for an entry point. He saw windows all over the structure, with some of them being enormous stained glass works of art. But he didn't want to leave a person-shaped hole in a window if he could avoid it, so he looked for balconies. There weren't any near ground level. He looked farther up, though the heights of the academy were hard to see behind the decorative mana, and it would cost a ton of stamina to get up that high. I might be able to absorb the mana spilling off the building, but it might be pretty damned obvious if my aura cuts a swath through the haze. But there would be benefits to being higher up, closer to the peak of the tower where the Archmages live. Not sure if the security would be better or worse up there. It took him a minute to locate a balcony against the enormous building, but once he saw one more popped out to him. The platforms only started showing up several hundred feet above the ground, and then stopped about halfway up the structure. A thrill of excitement went down Nathan's spine as he realized he could probably reach the nearer balconies. He was already dressed in the appropriate robe for infiltrating the academy, though he should probably try to start low. Low-tier students lived the closest to the bottom, after all. He took a deep breath to center himself. Was this a good idea? Should he instead use this opportunity to get the hell out of the city? Go back to Housemate, rejoin the heirs, and protect the city he'd so recently liberated? It would be safer. He wasn't even sure he'd be able to evade whatever wizardry protected the academy. But this is an opportunity. Badud's still recovering. They'll be trying to catch us in the city, so I'll have some time with their focus diverted. Even if they believe the kids, they'll think we left, not that I went into the academy. If I can work my way up the tower, I can kill Badud and the archmages in their beds, maybe even break whatever powers the academy itself. That would rip the heart out of Giant's Rest. He nodded to himself, feeling fired up. He was doing this. There was no value in waiting. There was no preparation he could make in the time available. For all he knew, the mages were about to be done with their meeting, and they'd unleash the entire population of the city to look for intruders. He needed to go now. Nathan took to the sky, climbing in a long and loping stride that was the most stamina-efficient way to cover ground. Still deflecting attention away with his stealth skills, he approached the bulk of the giant building.